Welcome back to the BestWorst12 podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Lewa. I'm really super excited about my guest for this interview. She's the executive producer for The Bonfire on Comedy Central Radio, Sirius XM 95. And she's also the executive producer for Skankfest NYC, Skankfest New York City. She's had a long career behind the scenes in comedy, and I'm actually looking forward to kind of digging into the deep background of the early days in the comedy clubs and everything else, because I'm so fascinated about this world. She also has served as the co-executive director or co-executive producer for What's Your Effin' Deal, working with comedians such as Reggie Watts, Jim Gaffigan, Michelle Wolf, Mark Norman, who's been blowing up everywhere. He's just wild. And Amy Schumer, just to name a few. I know those are a pretty exhaustive list, but just to name a few. Early in her career, she served as a production assistant for the Impractical Jokers, which I know a lot of people are familiar with. And so, like I said, I'm super excited to learn about the behind the scenes and also your stories. Welcome, Christine Evans.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for...
You're reading all that stuff. I'm like, where is all that? Is that on?
I'm very crafty in my research. You can consider me maybe somewhat of a professional internet sleuth or whatever, but I appreciate you doing this with me. And I'd like to just jump in by, if you can just tell this group your current roles. I mentioned, of course, the Bonfire and Skankfest. If you can talk to us about what you're doing with those roles right now.
Awesome. Okay, so on The Bonfire, I am the executive producer of the show. And so one of the big things is I am kind of a liaison between the talent and the crew and the network. And we are under two networks, both Comedy Central and Sirius. So kind of, a point person to connect all the dots together. I'm responsible for booking the show, I'm not really a creative as far as that goes. Like, I think pretty hack. So I'm not, writing jokes or anything, but just trying to come up with ideas for, marketing and branding and, segments and just what we can do really to get the word out. I'm obsessed with my hosts. I love them. I think they're brilliant and talented. So I love working with them. I love being in the room with them, 4 days a week, or 4 days a week, 8 hours a week, just being able to talk about anything and everything. It really is like a godsend to me. So I just want as many people to know about it as possible. And then, they can decide if they want to listen or not from there.
Absolutely. So, just to go talk about, the people you work with right now, you work with some incredible comedians on a regular basis. A lot of them who I've follow their careers. Actually, I saw Dan Soder. He came out to St. Louis when I was working part-time at a comedy club a few years ago. One of the coolest, most down-to-earth and funniest people. He has this episode on, I think it was like the old Opie and Anthony show or something, or Opie and Jim, where he does this. For folks who are listening, if you are for the faint of heart, don't listen to it. But it is this incredible Macho Man Randy Savage, eating while he's eating a steak. I don't know. I watched that thing so many times and sent it to friends. So you work with these really incredibly talented people. I'm just kind of curious about your thoughts about comedy. I always think of comedy as the attempt and the effort to make something funny. I agree with what the old Patrice O'Neill used to say, and so the deceased Patrice O'Neill. And so I'm just kind of curious about kind of working with that group of people. What's that like for you?
In what context? Like, as far as getting offended by stuff, as far as just like laughing about it, as far as working with them, as far as comedy goes as a whole, my thoughts on comedy, I think nothing's off limits. Yes. Obviously it's like the people that I work with and the talent that I work with, not that all of them are, crass or harsh or, dirty or anything like that. I just really I believe in trying to make light of everything.
Yes. And
a lot of that's just, there's when you deal with any sort of some people have very lovely lives. You know what I mean? They kind of get to go through their lovely lives and everything's kind of fine and dandy and nothing really goes off course too bad. More often than not, the people I relate to and the people I connect with are people that maybe had, things went a little rocky. And I find just when you have tragedy and pain in your life, you really need to laugh at it, because it's so easy just to I say comedy saved my life in a way. Like, you know, I feel like it's kept me away from like drug addictions and, you know, kind of going down darker paths just because I'm in this mindset of like, I don't know, like laughing about life and even the tragedy of life, just kind of, you know, trying to function in like the beauty of it more than the pain. And that's really like what comedy is supposed to do. I mean, it really is. I'm such a theater nerd. Like it's comedy and tragedy plus time equals comedy. Like
Yes.
it really is just to like let us drop our shoulders as like a human race.
Absolutely. I got to tell you, I kind of connect with, you know, the idea of anybody going through like a tough time. That's probably the motivation. And that's not probably, it's the motivation for why this podcast exists in the first place, of going through some really tough times and actually going down some of those paths you mentioned and finding my way out. And I got to tell you, between listening to podcasts and listening to people who inspired me with their stories, I also really focused in on comedy as really a way to ground myself sometimes just to disconnect and get away from it. So comedy has this beautiful, wonderful purpose. And so I love the idea of being able to look at all those things from that perspective, and especially the people who make up that world, including, I'm sure, you and me. But we're going to get to you about this next question about your path to your current role. Tell me your career path and how did you find yourself doing all this work behind the scenes?
Well, I started working in comedy clubs when I was 20, and it was kind of like I was doing hair at the time. I was a hairdresser, and it was like you kind of need to really put yourself into that to build a career. You need to like market and build. And I was still in college, and it was supposed to be like, you know, instead of waiting tables. And I ended up working as a food runner at the Comedy and Magic Club in Hermosa Beach back in 2005. And I was a food runner because you couldn't wait tables there until you were 21, and you couldn't work the door until you were 21. And then just quickly, I had been working since I was 14. And I had done, at that point, I'd already done like retail. I'd worked at an installation warehouse. I'd done hair. I worked at, you know, I just had all these odd jobs, and I'd kind of, you know, work for a couple months and get bored and then quit. And I was underage, so I was able to kind of frivolously quit my jobs when I wanted to. Right. And I found myself just like never getting bored at work. Like I'd wrap up my side work and I'd go and watch the shows. You know, the kitchen closed like an hour before the show was over, so I could go and watch the headliners. And it just kind of pushed me into this behind, like I just wanted to be there all the time. I would pick up shifts. Like we were open 6 days a week. I just wanted to be there. Anytime I wasn't there, I felt like something incredible happened that I missed out on. Oh, yeah. And so I started working the door. I was a door girl and like did the podium and, was able to function in that position. And then I started serving, and the manager there just really took an interest in me. Rebecca Meyer, she was great. You know, she was probably in her 40s and I was a 20-year-old girl. And she was really such an amazing mentor to me and taught me about like event productions. She had worked for Cheesecake Factory and done all, you know, that fun stuff. So she really started like breeding me for a management role in my 3 years at that club. Like I didn't even really realize that was what was happening. But I was being scheduled to work all these different positions within the club and, you know, kind of take on different roles and be able to bounce around. And like she helped me have this like versatility that by the time I moved to New York and got a job at the club, it was, you know, recognized. I was recognized very quickly by the higher ups there, whether it was like the events director, John Myers, who's an amazing events guy. And like he recognized that I had kind of had some training in this. And so it was really like as far as like managing goes, it was really just people, you know, it was from waiting tables. Like I'm like a blue collar girl, you know, like my dad's a mechanic, my mother's a hairdresser. Like I never really thought about like college as like a way to make money. I was like, oh, education's cool. But, you know, it was just like, it just kind of evolved. I was into show business. I was into theater and all that, but I just loved it. And I like wanted to be a part of it. And when I moved to New York, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And it was very quickly, I realized I'm like, I have to be around comedy. Like I have to be around comedy every day. Like it has to be a part of my normal life. It was like a withdrawal after years. And I was a college kid. I was like doing my school plays and like, I don't even know what I wanted to be when I came out here. I just wanted to be something. And it just very quickly, I realized I was like, oh no, I need this. Like I need this to be a part of my life. Like I need to be a part of this community and a part of this world. And so I decided to get a job at a club in New York. I could not for like a year. I couldn't get hired anywhere. Wow. So I like waited tables at a couple restaurants, California Pizza Kitchen and Dos Caminos and a sports bar. And then I got a job at a comedy club and I started managing that club. That club closed. I started managing another club. Once I was at that point, I started producing a little bit. And then I got hired by a management and production company that was opening a comedy club called The Stand. Mm-hmm. And so that was really, you know, up until that point, it was kind of like I wasn't really in the business, if that makes sense. It was like I was a club girl. And so it's like you know, you're kind of like in the trenches with people every night, but you're not really, you know, you're not really dealing or worrying about the business side of things on the level that I do now. Something like at the time, you know, at the time you're like, I'm in the business. And then you're like, I manage it. And it was really just like, it was just this it's so weird because now it's been 15 years that I've been in comedy and now I guess 6 years in broadcasting and, you know, podcasting and all that. It's weird how it all kind of toppled onto each other. It was like all of a sudden I had done all these projects and I didn't even I'm like, but I'm a waitress. Yeah. And a lot of it was, you know, I do have organizational skills and I do have management skills. And I kind of found like, what are my strengths? What are my skills? Like I was able to develop and figure out like what I want to do and how I can be a valuable member of this community. And I didn't know if I wanted to be an agent. I didn't know if I wanted to be a manager, like a talent manager, not a club manager. I didn't know if I just wanted to spend the rest of my life like managing comedy clubs because it's so goddamn fun. It really is just like such a fun life to spend, you know, just on a daily basis. You're just in nightclubs laughing. And I'm so thankful. I ended up doing it for 10 years. And I'm so thankful that that's how I spent my 20s, you know, just smiling and laughing and hearing jokes. And really what it was is, you know, you build trust, you build relationships, you connect with people. And everything for me seems to have happened like very naturally. And a lot of that was just, you know, kind of just being able to, I was always doing like something I wanted to be doing, even if I wasn't necessarily like pushing myself to the max or like, you know, I wasn't going and working that office job to get the experience that I needed. It was like, I was always working and I was always enjoying life. And I made a point. I've been very, very, very lucky throughout my career to have every step of the way been working on projects that I absolutely love, adore, care about, and want to put passion into. I've never really taken a job on something just because I'm like, oh, let me go work on that reality show because I need production experience, which was suggested to me. But I'm like, I'd rather just stay in this fucking comedy club than go work on some show I don't give a fuck about.
Right.
You know, so, and it ended up paying off. And maybe it was, you know, I feel like I've taken like a back door into comedy and into the business side of things. I'm in a relationship with a comic, you know, whatever nepotism and shit goes with that. He definitely, you know, we've worked alongside each other for a long time, but it was more like a connection between talent and producer than like, this is my girlfriend, this is my boyfriend, we're going to work together. It was like, we kind of, our romantic relationship kind of like built up along the same time as that professional relationship was. Mm-hmm. We just, I don't know, we're able to work with each other well. It's the same thing with Dan Soder. It's like, I find it easy to work with him. Yeah. Lewis, it's like, I find it easy to work with him. Like Louis J. Gomez, who I do the festival with. And, you know, it's people where, I don't know, I feel very like connected and grounded in my work because it's constantly with people and projects that I really, you know, I really like want to do everything I can to help the success of these shows and businesses.
That's a fantastic focus. You know, it's a really good message to people out there who are, I mean, a couple of things. One of them is you talked about how much you just loved it and you wanted to be around comedy. And even if you were waitressing or serving or working the podium, you just wanted to be around this thing. And, for whatever compelling reason that was, it was pulling you towards it. And while you could have taken some shortcuts or received some other experiences, focusing on something that you really valued and appreciated paid off. But I want to go back to something, Rebecca. This Rebecca sounds amazing. She must have saw something in you. I mean, you've clearly been working since you were 14. You're a hard worker, right? You've been hustling and working all kinds of different jobs, while you're going to school and then eventually going to college. And Rebecca sees this young person and says, I'm going to give you some opportunities to get these other experiences, which builds this skill set, which develops the skill set. And so, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your relationship with her. And why do you think that how did you feel like you got connected to her? Why do you think that she kind of focused on you and you were able to connect with her?
I don't know. It's so funny because as I talk about her, I realize how long it's been since I've talked to her. And it was something where, I feel like sometimes as like young women, we're taught that like older women, have it out for us. Like we're the young bitches. And it was just so not that. I don't know. It was just, it's something where I'm like, I was a young girl and she saw some sort of potential in me and in my work ethic. And I guess that was just it, because it was something where, it was when I was a food runner there, I would really like try to be a good food runner because I didn't want to fuck up. I didn't want to lose my job. Like my job was my community, my fun, my lifestyle. Like it meant a lot to me. So I think, and it's something that I listen to Howard Stern a lot and I hear him talk. He's like, when I was a dishwasher, I was a good dishwasher.
Right.
Me too. Like when I worked at Papa John's, I was a good Papa John's employee. When I worked at as a waitress, I was a good waitress. Like I would do the work. I'm not saying that I haven't like been a shitty waitress from time to time. I did it forever. But
yeah. We've all been there.
I think she just like wanted to encourage me. You know what I mean? Like, and it was something where when I left, I don't know, my last month there, I was a little shitty. I was like moving away. I grew up in the town the comedy club was in, and I was moving to New York. It was a big time. I was 23 years old. And I remember staying in the office with her and we started just bawling together. And she goes, you don't understand. I depend on you out there. Wow. And it just made, I was like, oh, I don't want to leave. But, she, whatever it was, it's like she felt like she could depend on me and she felt like she could depend on me to take on those different roles. So it's something that I really appreciate. And she was never... It's so funny. I was 20 years old when I worked there, 21, 22, 23. A lot of the women were like in their 30s, in their 40s, and they were just all so fucking awesome. They were all such great chicks and like really like took me under the wing. The guys that were there were like my brothers. Like it'd be like if we were out drinking and I seemed a little too drunk and a guy came to like hit on me, they would come put their arm around me and be like, what's going on over here? So, we had this like major sense of community at that club that I've really tried to replicate in every business that I go into. Just that sense of camaraderie, really giving a shit about the people you work with, not just the products that you're producing, whatever that may be, and having that like, familiar. It's like you should give a shit about the people you spend your time with. That's really important. And I really feel like, the people that run that club, the way it's run, the staff, and she was she hired everyone. And it made me real. I consider myself good at hiring. And I feel like I learned that from her because she was just able to like pick good eggs to come be a part of that team. And so it was, she had an eye for grabbing people. So I always kind of like, I don't really talk about my career that much. So I've never really talked about her before.
Well, I do appreciate that. And I hope somehow she finds her way to this podcast and she gets a chance to listen to it because, Rebecca, it sounds like you're a pretty special person. So there's a couple of things it sounds like you got from these experiences. One of them is this idea about just caring about the people around you. It sounds like these supportive, creative environments with strong teams where people actually were not just interested in what you produced for them. They actually cared about you as a person. It was very formative. This other piece you talked about earlier was about building trust and relationships, and that seeming to kind of catapult you into these other new experiences. And so would you mind kind of giving me your thoughts on just this idea of just caring about people and just relationships in general, how those are important to your career?
Well, let's see. I guess when you build trust, like when you have whatever your job is, I feel like if you do your job well, that can get noticed. So whatever it was, if I was, a good waitress or good at running the club, it's like I feel like people start to notice that, and whether that's demeanor or, I I try to, you can be moody, and sometimes it's hard when you're just like, I'm a moody fucking, it's a lot. But the environments that I worked in, it's like you go out and you have to be smiley and you have to be friendly. And I found myself, if I was in a bad mood, I'd go into work and I'd leave in a good mood. Oh. And that was like a really good place to be. So I think there was just, I remember when I was at Stand Up New York, this was Dave Attell walked up to me and he said, he just leaned on the podium and goes, "You seem like a reasonable person. When are you going to get out of here and start managing?" Wow. And I was like, "What?"
Was like, oh, Dave Attell says that?
And I remember telling him, I was like, "I don't know anything yet, Dave. Like, I still have to learn stuff." And, but that was really cool. It was just cool seeing people. And you don't know, it's like, I oddly didn't go to a lot of comedy clubs I didn't work at, because I was always working. So I didn't know until a little later in my career, as I started going out to shows, I'm like, oh, a lot of people just don't give a fuck. Like, a lot of bookers don't care. They don't care about their talent. Like, to a lot of people, it is a business. They're not comedy nerds. They saw a market for something, and it's business, 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 business. They don't treat their artists well. They don't treat the talent well. They don't treat the staff well. And I'm just like, I never want to be like that. And so I think that just that desire, people start, and then also just, I remember when I was doing hair, my friend Tara, every once in a while, she'd be like, "Christine, you play too much." And it was just like, where you can kind of be like, you're always like joking around. You're always making a joke. You're always trying to make a joke about something. Now, whether or not it's funny, it's like just always in that mode of like trying to talk shit. And then like being around professional community, like I just always found, I'm like, these people are so easy to talk to. Like, I found comics so easy to talk to. I didn't feel like I was in a world where I was like too much or too outspoken or too any of that. And I also found that like the people coming into the clubs, working at the clubs that wanted to be there, were good people. And then just the general public that was choosing to spend their time by going to see stand-up comedy, it was like a good group of people that I was around as well. It was like the customers were cool. It was a lot different than like working at a sports bar in Midtown.
Right.
So, a lot of it just, I think, doing a good job at the things that I was responsible to do at the time, and like just building personal relationships and being able to talk to people. Eventually things just kind of start clicking. And then it's been other people like believe. I said, if it were up to me, like I'd just be like crying in a corner, worried about how like everything's going to fuck up and everything's going to fall apart and nothing's going to go well. And it's all going to be a disaster. Luckily, I have like other people, such as my business partners, like Louis J. Gomez and Rebecca Trent, where I'm like, they believe in me. Like they believe I can get it done. They believe I can like do what needs to be done. And the same way I trust them. So a lot of my success in my career is really like working with the right people for me, working with people that, have the same goals and have skill sets that I don't have and can like kind of help me find what I'm good at.
That's fantastic. There are a few things that I kind of want to highlight here. One of them is this: earlier on you said, do your job and well, and people, and you'll get noticed. And I think that that's a powerful message to tell people. I mean, it's not like, you went in with the idea of loving comedy, but you did all the jobs that a lot of people have to do early in a comedy club, whether it's working the door or serving or whatever else, but you did it well, right? Like you did it at your best. And that idea of, hard work works, and that people really pay attention to that. And I think people are more likely and more apt to try to help you out once they see you putting the effort. They don't want to waste their energy on somebody who's not going to see it through. And so I love that idea. You also looked at this comedy as not just a job. It sounds like other producers sometimes look at it as a gig, a way to make some money, a money grab, if at all. But for you, what sustains a long career has been, about the people, the relationships, putting out good products, the connections with people, and then the open culture of the people you work around. I mean, that's when I think about comedy. I know some people do get bothered and turned off by certain things, but the reason why I'm willing to take it all in is because I like the idea that every attempt, everything, every person, you come as you are, no matter how broken, bruised, how tough your past situation is, you're always looking for a way to spin it, to find funny, and I think that's amazing. I do want to say, you talk about yourself as moody. I had a friend when I was growing up. He said, "Josh, you're moody." And I was like, "No, I'm not." I got all upset. I was like, oops. And so, it's the idea of, I like to call it passionate. I love hard. I get angry big time, and I'm super excited. So I can very connect with the moodiness factor. All right. So what's your background? Like, where are you from? Where were you raised? Tell me about your family. What would you like to share about that?
Well, it's funny. This will actually tie into the other thing, but I am from Redondo Beach, California. I am, a beach girl through and through. I have my mother is full blown Armenian, both sides, and very, very ethnic family on that end. But she really I don't know, she really just wanted to be like a blonde beach girl herself. Like she kind of, she didn't teach me Armenian. Like she really just wanted to assimilate. My dad is a California surfer mechanic, served got drafted in '69, and just one of the best guys I'll ever come across in my life. So that's kind of that where I'm from. And then the big thing for me, as far as my background goes, is my mother was diagnosed with degenerative MS when I was 3 years old. And so I kind of lived life with a mother in a wheelchair and, a father taking care of a mother. So it was a little bit of a different family dynamic than just what normal, mother, father, daughter relationships are.
Yeah. So, I'm a Southern California kid. I was born in Uganda, but I was raised in Garden Grove in Orange County.
Oh, yeah.
And so,
I'm song.
Yeah. So I get a chance. In fact, for my past job with admissions, I would travel all the time. And my favorite place to go to was the Comedy Store in New York. I went to New York actually on 9/11 a few years ago and tried to get into comedy clubs. I could not get into a comedy club. I was so upset. I can appreciate, your dad's generation of those folks who got drafted to Vietnam. Those are my friends' parents' generation as well, and what they went through and their friends. So now, did you go to what high school did you go to in California?
So here is and this kind of, I was trying to figure out, this kind of ties into the best worst thing, but I'm kind of I'm a fuck up on paper for sure. And I've always said that about myself, where if you're when people ask me about my history, I'm well, I dropped out of high school and I spent 4 years at a 2-year college before packing a suitcase and moving to New York.
Yeah.
So I'm that's my story, and it wasn't even I did well in school all growing up. It was just, there's just a lot going on at that time. And I say it was something where when I got here, I was I'll just figure it out when I get here. But because of that, and hindsight's 2020, sometimes I'm oh, I wish I'd finished my degree. But I loved going to my junior college, El Camino, Torrance, California. It's a great school. I really enjoyed my time there. I was a theater kid there. And I just loved taking everything. So I took anthropology and I took cultural anthropology and I took business marketing. And then I took astronomy and I kept changing my major and changing my major and changing my major. And then it was all of a sudden, it's 4 years later, I have 130 units and none of them count towards anything. So I have an AS. Because I don't have a degree, and I was never in college, I could never really get internships with my dream was to intern. It was 2 women, Joanne Grigeroni and Ann Harris, were the talent people at Comedy Central forever. And it was my dream to intern with them when I came here. But there's no way to get an internship when you're, a 23-year-old that's horrible on paper with no degree. And, I eventually ended up Ann Harris was one of the producers on The Bonfire. I eventually ended up wrapping around working with her. But my background as far as school and all that goes, I'm everything I've done. And it's I'm not even trying to sound, I feel it sounds lame, but it's all been pure hustle.
Yeah.
So,
no, But to me, that is so important. And this is going to sound interesting from a guy, as we talked about this offline, but who works in higher education, is that, while education tends to be the traditional route for everybody, you can't train and teach experience in the classroom. And that's where that hustle comes from, or that's what that hustle benefits people. I know, I grew up in a working class community where most people didn't go to college, and a lot of them are doing really well and are successful, but they're willing to put in the work and they're willing to hustle.
Yeah. And it's just, I remember going to beauty school. I dropped out of high school when I was 15. And then when I was 18, I went to beauty school. And I remember them even telling us too, they're it was really just to learn sanitation. They're you're going to learn what you need to learn when you're out there, when you're, working as an assistant, when you're in the salon, that's when you're going to learn. And there's something about that really stuck with me, where I'm school's great. I love school. but I wouldn't really say that anything that I learned in like school is really what helped me in business. There's like a couple things from business marketing, and I also didn't specialize and go into a field. Obviously, it's like if you want to be a filmmaker, you have to learn film, but just specifically for what I do, I'm like, I don't really like know what part of school was the thing that like helped me become a good producer. I feel like that was all like working since I was 14, learning how to like bounce around different, it's learning how to communicate with people well, like knowing how to put all the pieces together. And I feel like that was more work experience in school.
Well, that's great. And again, I do think with the broad audience that we have, that's going to connect with me and a lot of people. Also, plug your ears if you're on Kids, but people who know me. But you say you're a fuck up. You're a fuck up. You look like you're a fuck up on. I'm going to say, how many times can I say that word on paper? It's interesting. I think and people will probably hear this from me in later podcasts. But I don't think it takes too much effort to find out where my missteps were, and they're pretty public. And it's just amazing how, people who have varying level of success in their fields, it looks so easy on the front end, or it looks so easy when they appear and show up, however we see them, but they don't realize that it's not all a smooth ride or smooth road. And there's no one path to success. It's not one thing that's laid out for all of us. And that we, in my case, I did some really big missteps. So, you could screw up along the way and still make it.
Yeah. And it really, it's a big thing for me. And it's something I always try to push is like the power of intention, the power of knowing what you want, of actually being able to sit and like visualize what you want. So you know what you're working towards. I find like the times where I let myself down and, weren't always best to myself, it was when I didn't really know what I wanted at all. And it just felt like everything was kind of collapsing in on itself. So being able to take a step back, yearly or twice a year and go like, okay, so I did a vision board like 3 years ago that I was looking at recently. And I was like, oh my gosh, so much of this is true now. And that was a really fucking cool feeling that like 3 years ago, I put a bunch of things down on a poster board that like I wanted to be truths. And a lot of them are truths now. It's really just like kind of knowing like what exactly it is that you want to work towards.
So some people who are my friends who are listening to this know that you just got me hooked, because I'm going to ask you about that, because I'm a big believer in visualization. I'm a big believer, in fact, I told my son during a tough time, a gift I gave him was this little notepad or this little booklet, and I said, and a pen, and I said, dude, if you don't write it down, if you don't see it, it can't happen. So, tell me about is that something that's really helpful for you in your career? And I mean, clearly in retrospect, that board you made has shown up and manifested in some ways. Is that something pretty big for you?
Huge. It's something where, and it's something that I do with Jay as well. It's like with my boyfriend who's a comedian, it's like you sit down and go like, what do I want? Like not what needs to be done, what is it that I want in life right now? And I think that it's and it can be harder than it seems. It's like I'm not always in the mood. I tell myself every week I function better throughout the week if I do a to-do list on Sunday night. I just do. It focuses me. It makes me like understand what needs to be done. I like the feeling of crossing things off the list as I move through it. I don't always write that to-do list Sunday night. I don't know why. It's like I know that it's something that really, really helps focus me and kind of like keep me from starting panicking about all the things that need to get done. Because sometimes I'm like, oh my God, like, you feel like the world's closing in on you. You're like, how do I possibly function? You're like, oh no, I got this. Here's my checklist. You can do this because you actually know what needs to be done. It's not like hypothetical. It's real things that need to happen. And I like can't imagine going through life not doing that. It's something, it's my hippy dippy California roots. Like it's something that's just in my soul.
That must be what it is. I'm feeling that.
I'm like, we're beach people. Like, yeah, you know how it is. I'm like, everybody, I'm like, am I supposed to talk? I'm like, everybody's going to think I'm a fucking weirdo.
No. Yeah. I live on the beach and I'm certain, to be honest with you, a lot of the people who I listened to, I was going through a rough time, really talked about exactly what you're talking about. They're like, you got to write this stuff down. They talked about vision boards. I started doing stuff like even saving images as my wallpaper on my phone, so was forced to see these things subconsciously every single time I picked up my cell phone. so much about it. In fact, this podcast was a product of me writing it down 2 years ago and saying, I'm going to create a podcast called The Best Worst Thing. And, it came a time where it needed to happen, and it happened. So I'm a big believer in that. So yeah, maybe it's our hippy dippy California lifestyle, but I'm sure people all over the world who are doing this work because it works.
Yeah. And it's something too, where it's like, I do love my life, but it's not by accident. It's not by chance. It's like by kind of knowing where I wanted to focus my energy, how I wanted to focus it, what I wanted to do. I've always loved radio. I actually tried to, when I was applying for colleges, I applied to Emerson. I wanted to go into like broadcast journalism and school of visual media arts, which would in turn help with what I do now. I'm like, maybe if I'd gotten in there, I'd be in a position where I'd be like, oh my gosh, college helped you so much, actualize my dreams, but they didn't want me. So, it's something where as I go through my life, I'm like, I've always been a fan of live entertainment specifically. I like I was always a fan of like concert films. I'm a big fan of, whether it's like all the Unplugged series that VH1 did, the Storyteller series, specials, all that. And I love that I'm able to, I'm like, oh, it kind of makes sense to me that I'm in the world. A lot of it, they're like, when you read Reddit comments about yourself, you're like, oh, Jay's dumb girlfriend who was a waitress. And I'm like, you're right. I'm like, I am Jay's dumb waitress or dumb girlfriend. I was a waitress, and it from the outside looking in, it can look like I just like slept with Jay one day and had a career handed to me. But I'm like, it's not by accident. It's not by accident that I do the things I do and then I work with the people I work with. It's like really a dedication to those things.
Christine, none of it was an accident, and I'm a big believer, listening to your story, that that's the case, that everything, had a step towards where you're at right now. And, while as I'm sure amazing as Jay is, I'm sure he wouldn't take credit. We're going to pause for a second, and then we'll get started again with the big question.
No sleep, only for the weary. Don't speak, let your dreams escape. Nothing that I can say or do can take away my pain for you. Taming the beast is not so easy.
All right. So as you know, this podcast is called The Best Worst Thing. So this is the time where I ask you about, what's the worst thing? What's the thing that happened to you, a moment of a personal or professional challenge that you persisted through? How did you get through it? And then what's the lessons or maybe some advice that you pass along to people based on this selected experience? So Christine, what is your best worst thing?
Ooh, okay. I thought about this for a while, and I was going to be like, oh, I didn't get accepted to Emerson. It ruined my life. And I'm like, that actually like wasn't really that bad. So I didn't know. I'm like, oh, all right. It was for sure 100% my mother's death. Like there's nothing. It was so influential in my life. Like her illness was one thing. Her illness was just life. It was almost expected. And it is hard, it's like I watched my mother crippled to death for 13 years, and then she died when I was 15. But there was elements to that where it's like I had a loving, wonderful mom around. If I got in trouble, she called the church on me. I was like, she'd listen. My mom was in a wheelchair, so it's like any song and dance number that I learned or any picture I drew was like all entertainment for her. So she was very like encouraging of me, just like me being me. She really loved me, my mother. So even though she was sick for most of my life, she was a very prominent force in my life to like keep me grounded and keep me going and all that. And I didn't really know that she was going to die. I kind of just thought she was going to be sick forever. And part of that's being a kid, like, not having things explained to you. Or MS is also something that generally goes into remission. There's 3% of cases that are degenerative, and she had that where it just goes. And at that time as well, so I'm 15 years old, my mother's dead. My dad works 3 to midnight. I live a block and a half away from the high school. It was just kind of a scene. Like, I think my father, we had not a peer relationship, but I think that he trusted me to take care of myself, like in a way that he probably shouldn't have. I probably should have been, it's like I was a young girl going through like the death of a parent, and I was just really left alone and left to my own devices. I was able to drop out of school. When I say I dropped out, I'm like, I dropped out. He was like, okay. He goes, are you not going to school anymore? I'm like, no. He goes, okay, so, you know, you got to figure it out. So it's not like I was just a dropout, not doing anything. It's like I signed up for independent study. I did all this stuff. Like I did all this stuff to, you know, keep people off my back. But I would just like hang out at home and then like go up to the school for recess and lunch and hang out with everybody after school and have people over. And I'm saying my mother's death because it was really this time period. So I dropped out of high school. My mom died. About a year later, my dad started dating my mom's cousin. He was going down to her house. It was this whole crazy thing. And it put me into the way I dealt with that was with drugs. I just did drugs. I did any drugs that I could get my hand on. Now, I was so resourceful in getting my drugs. I mean, like I did yard work. I worked jobs. I like hustled my family. You know, it was just, I was like, wow, if I put that energy into something besides my own demise, I may have like started a business sooner or something. But I just really went into my own demise. And just like wallowed in my grief and my sorrow, and I dropped everything and I didn't care about anything. Now I can reflect on that time and go like, I had a lot of fun. Like, I'm not going to say that, like, I didn't. I mean, it was just, like, nonstop hedonistic fun as, like, a young girl. And, you know, just so much, like, hate, like, why did this happen? When I started coming out of it, so that was when I was 15. By the time I was about to turn 18, like, my dad was marrying, who's now been my stepmom for, like, 10 years, and moving out, and the house I grew up in was being sold, and it just became very clear. I was like, oh, nobody's fucking responsible for me anymore. Like, I'm going to have to be responsible for myself. And thank God there was just this click. Like I went to, I also had like family members, like female family members disowned me because they heard that I had kissed a girl, which like I have very Armenian, like homophobic family. They like heard, it wasn't even true. Like I think I was like affectionate with, I've always been like very affectionate with my female friends, maybe from like not having like the physical, I didn't have the physical love of a mother. So I'm just like a very affectionate person. And it was something where they stopped talking to me because they heard that. So I didn't really have like a lot of like, I didn't really have female guidance too much. And I was also a really good liar. So I just lied my ass off about everything I was doing. And it was something, I say best worst thing because it's hard to say that my mother's death was like a best thing at all, but with the state of her illness and how bad it was and how horrible it was and how like exponentially better life became after that, it turned out to be a good, if I could go back in time, I go, oh man, I wish that never happened, but it was just something where you can see now as an adult, I go, she was ready to let go. Like she was ready to go. She was like done here. Like she hung on as long as she could. And there's something about that where now, you know, I'm going to be 35 next week. I'm a 35-year-old woman. This happened when I was 15. Nothing has been that difficult. Nothing in my entire adult life. It's all been fucking gravy since then. I mean, everything's just been, it's almost like fun and games. And now keep in mind, like I'm not married. I don't have children. Like I didn't take on that responsibility of like having that family structure and like, but it's just all been fine. Like nothing has really been that hard. Again, as I was thinking about like the show, I'm like, oh, that can be true. Everybody says like childhood is so easy and all this, but really I'm like, oh no, childhood was the hardest for me. Like once you're responsible for yourself, like once I turned 18 and I was like, I had my autonomy and I could do whatever I wanted to do and take any direction I chose. And also like without, you know, a burden of like trying to live up to like my mom's expectations of what she wanted me to be. Like I was also free of that. So it was just this very freeing time. And I realized I'm like, oh no, sometimes like childhood can just be the worst thing. And I think it's so important to be able to take a step back from that and go like, well, I don't need to, like now it's up to me. Now these are my choices. It's my choices. I unfortunately, like, I don't have great relationships with a lot of my family, but I'm like, so be it. You know, I broke down with a family member. I'm like, you should be proud of me.
Right.
I'm like, do you understand that? Like, you should be proud of me. You shouldn't be telling me that I need church. So it really was something. And then the other side of that is like the other worst thing that I can't say is the best thing. We had a terrible tragedy happen in the comedy community last year. And specifically with like me and Jay, my boss that actually, I would say him and his business partners and the guys that run the stand, Cringe Humor, it's Chris Talia, Paul Talia, Patrick Milligan, and the late Dave Kimowitz, they kind of like plucked me from obscurity. You know, they were kind of the guys that were like, they saw something in me. Like they wanted to hire me to come like open their comedy club and assist them at their management company and all that, just from like producing shows with them at clubs that I managed. So it was really, they were like the first guys who like saw something more in me than like getting them drinks. And, you know, I was hired for the company at the same time Jay was brought on as a client. Like a lot of our relationship has like evolved through that. And this last year there was, you know, Dave was, he was murdered. And it was a horrible situation. It was something where I realized like what I was able to do this time that I couldn't do when I was 15, when this like horrible tragedy struck, is I definitely like, I was able to feel it. I was able to cry my eyes out every day, and I was able to go through it without what I knew not to do. Like I knew that I shouldn't start taking drugs. I knew that I shouldn't start taking anti-anxieties or cocaine or like any of these old crutches that I had used in the past to get through this grief, and instead just like feel the emotions and go through the process. So I'm like, and I attribute a lot of that to dealing with my mother's death and whatever resilience that built in me to be able to take on, and I wouldn't say I dealt with it great. Look, it was still really hard, but I did deal with it. I didn't, and I'm still dealing with it, and we'll see what happens. You know, it's great. I was telling both the tragedies in my life. My mom's death was April of 2001, and then Dave's death was August of 2019, both followed with like global tragedies right afterwards. So it was like my mom's death was followed by 9/11. And then Dave's death was followed by the pandemic. Yes. And so it's like, I honestly haven't even, it was almost like God was like, you need to grieve, girl. Like I'm giving you a break because we haven't even like dealt with really moving forward what this is going to look like without this like completely influential, you know, important person as a part of our lives anymore. So, you know, those are things where I'm like, I'm not going to say I really feel like it was so senseless and all that. But, you know, I'm grateful for the experience I had with my mother to help me move through something like this. And then also something like this happened. You're like, well, what the fuck could be worse than this now? You're like, hopefully me and all my friends, like hopefully nobody will experience tragedy. Like hopefully this is the top for us, you know? So, but everything does, you know, it's hard. Sometimes you want to go back and you want to change. Oh, I could have done it this way. I could have done it that way. I could have done this. I should have done this. If I had just done that, and I'm like, I don't know, like I do enjoy my life. And I feel like I've enjoyed my life, my entire adult life. Look, there's been some like bad times and broke times. And obviously, you know, been a goddamn long-term relationship forever. Like that's a whole new thing. You're like, oh, wow. You're like you're like, oh my gosh, somebody, I'm connected. But it really was, those two, you know, I think one of those ties into the other, and it really was. And I think it's really important to, you know, it gets to a point where you're like, you can only blame your childhood for so long. At a point, you're like, well, you've been in the driver's seat for a long time, buddy. So those things, you know, and nothing professionally. I've had clubs closed. I've had like, nothing's that bad, you know, and I've actually been, and I say this, not even trying to like dog myself or treat myself shitty, where I'm like, I was never like a young hot chick. Like I was never like the young bubbly 22-year-old with like big tits and like a hot body. Like I was like a grizzled war vet by the time I was 17. Like I've looked 30 forever. And I think because of that, you know, it's like, I haven't dealt with like working at all the men that I work with. Like I've never dealt with sexual harassment in my businesses. Like I've never dealt with, like, I've had men be super respectful towards me. I've had great mentors that are men where it's like, that's never even been a thing. I'm like, oh, that's the plight of a hotter chick than I, you know? And not to say that it can't happen but I think I've been like really lucky in business. And I think some of that's just, you know, there's also things it's like, I understand feeling like you're like, oh, if I quit this, like I'm miserable, but if I leave this situation, my entire world falls apart. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, it doesn't. If you're miserable and you're in a shitty situation, you quit that situation and you go find something else that makes you happy. Yes. And something is like, don't be stuck in anything. Like you don't need to be miserable.
I was just talking to my son about that literally today. He had lost one job, and then this great new opportunity just came up for him today, and he was super excited. For him and his girlfriend, he was just beaming through the phone, and it was just reminding me of the idea that when one door closes, whether that's, work or relationships or anything else, another door opens. I know it's old, maybe you talked about hack, maybe that's an old hack saying, but I truly believe it. I really want to talk about just the connectedness between these two major losses. I mean, being young, watching your mother suffer and go through MS and have that 3% chance of going into that space where it was going to be degenerative to the place of her passing away and having to go through the deep grief and sorrow, and the way you handled it, I think, honestly, nobody would be surprised. I know not everybody handles it that way, but, engaging in drugs and having this hedonist lifestyle and being able to numb, I mean, I definitely can connect with that. And I'm certain that people who are listening can connect with that. But that's, no matter what age you are, that's one of the biggest losses that anybody ever goes through in life, and I totally get it. But the interesting point that you put on that is that you went through your hard times in your youth. When people say life gets harder when you get older, and you're like, no, it's been all fun since. I mean, there've been challenges, but I went through the hard stuff early. So, now it's like, even if it's hard, I know that I'm going to get through it. And an example, of course, is with your most recent loss, you didn't fall back into those old patterns. You have a new way of dealing with it. I mean, I'm sure you have better days and you have worse days, but the fact of the matter is that you still are trying to figure out your way through it. And as you mourn, you're still moving forward in a positive way. And you all will figure out how you're going to move forward collectively. And so what an interesting kind of, I guess, juxtaposition or matchup between those two experiences. It's super amazing and super impactful.
I was super excited that I didn't. And it was something, because now I'm like, now we're almost a year removed from the actual event itself. But I was surprised. I just quit drinking like 3 years ago. And it was like, there were so many times during that where it's like, I just wanted to, I kept glorifying. I was like, I just want a glass of wine. I just want a glass of wine. I just want a scotch. I just want that. I'm like, no, you don't. I'm like, you want to go get fucked up. That's what you want to do. Like, stop telling yourself you want to sit down and have a glass of wine. I'm like, you want to get fucked up so you don't have to think about what's going on. And it was something like, I am, I'm happy I've been able to keep my addictions at bay. Like, they're everywhere. It's like, I'm surprised I'm not a 300-pound chick. I was like, with the way I ate as a kid, I'm like, that's where it was headed. Food was, my first love. And, whether it's, it's like I've acted out sexually, I've acted out with drugs, all that. So it's just kind of like keeping it at bay, which I was happy to I was able to realize that like that only is going to make everything worse. Like, it's not going to make anything better.
And that's an absolute truth. And I think that what you say echoes a lot of what most people have either experienced or would say when they get interviewed here, when they talk about their experiences with things similar. But I think your story is really, really unique and amazing. I got to say, just from just your upbringing of being this 14-year-old grinder, hustler, a person who's willing to put in the work, all the way through to all the connections and the lessons you made and learned along the way. It's amazing, and it's come together to be this incredible, incredible story and career. And I'm glad that you're actually getting a chance to tell the story.
Well, thank you it's so funny. I always look at my career. It's like, I'm kind of, I'm always worried about the careers of the talent that I work, how are we getting that going? Or like the businesses I work for, that's not like when you emailed me to do this, I was like, oh my God, I have a career too.
Absolutely.
Like, look at that. I'm like, we're going to hit 5 years with we're about to hit 5 years with Bonfire, which is super exciting. And then, look, this year it's like me and my partners, Lewis and Rebecca, we just Lewis got mad at me because I wasn't angry enough. And I'm like, I spent all year having a nervous breakdown. I'm like, this all sucks. Like, it all blows. We thought we were going to like double our business this year. We were doing 2 events. Everything was going great. And we just got the rug pulled out from underneath us. But I'm like, I have confidence just in the way we work and how passionate we are about what we do. I'm like, as soon as I go, well, I'll be there on the other side for us. I'm like, we're still, everybody's still broadcasting. Like, Rebecca's still running her restaurant and her club. And, we're all working on like what we can do right now to create content with the current, climate and how everything is. But I'm like, we'll be able to. I'm like, if it's next year, if it's later in the year, I'm like, we'll be able to do this again. And it's like, it's just that excitement of being able to, I'm like, oh man, like we were going to do 2 events. Like we were going to have, I'm like, and it was going to be awesome. Like we were going to actually double our business in a year. And it's like, nope. But, it's hard to get down about it when like, I'm so great, especially with like the diversifying like the type of content we put out, not having it all be live event production, not having it all be live stand-up comedy, doing these podcasts and radio shows and all that. I'm like, I'm so thankful I'm able to continue to work through this. I'm like, that's crazy.
Yeah. Well, it's awesome. And I'm super grateful that you are too. I look forward also to attending an event in the future. I think that's going to be something that gets written down so I can make sure I join it. Christine, I want to thank you so much. Could you tell the listeners where they can find you or where they can follow you?
Yes, I am on both Instagram and Twitter at Christine M. Evans. And yeah, that's really it. I don't have a website or anything like that. I'm on Facebook. I don't think I have 5,000 friends yet. And skankfestnyc.net is the website for the event that we do, the comedy festival that we do. You can follow us there at skankfestnyc, and then the bonfire is at the bonfire SXM on all social media. And that is on Comedy Central Radio, Sirius XM 95, Mondays through Thursdays, 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern.
That is perfect. Once again, thank you, Christine, and everybody, thank you for listening to The Best Worst Thing. Thank you for listening to the Best Worst Thing podcast. I'm your host, Josh Walewa. Music is produced by DJ Josh One. You can follow him at Boom Note on Instagram and Twitter, and Josh One on Spotify. The Best Worst Thing podcast is edited by Cool Jets Audio and Visual. You can find them at Cool Jets AV on Instagram. Our marketing is designed by Francesca Daniels. You can find her at FrankandKitty24 on Instagram. And our overall design is by Inspired Design with Ryan Daniels. You can find them at getinspired.design on Instagram. Please download us from iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite platform. And remember to share us with your friends, especially those people you think really need us in their life. Don't forget to give us a 5-star review. Thank you for listening to The Best Worst Thing.
The cool Cali kid from the boondocks. Bounce through your hood like Chaka with a crime on. Independent thing to play a beat, I get my rhyme on. So when I strut on a path to perfection, city to your borough, to your town, to your streets. Keep your party live, Josh One. Got beats out of nature, Grazer, Oakland, strays to Asia. It's like Frasier, force of Fantasia. Move through your suburb, hiking.